that make sense. So Devin and I have been doing some traveling, but he's the co-founder and president of Intellectual Takeout. His role, he oversees the content development, marketing, and works with the academics. But he also really is one of the lead faces and speakers for Better Ed. He has become a great friend and participant and partner to the Minnesota Tea Party Alliance. Please welcome Devin Foley.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the applause. I'll actually transfer it over to my wife. She did the majority of the work, you know, having the baby and all that, so I was a good coach, that's what I did. Well, thank you for coming out tonight. I want to share a little bit about education here and what Better Ed is doing, as well as what's happening across the state and in some of your local schools as well. So with Better Ed, our goal is to be able to raise awareness about both the high cost, low achievement that's often happening in our schools, unfortunately, and then also to make people aware of both education philosophy, content, and then to give them push for solutions that are out there, predominantly for school choice, so that parents have the freedom to be able to find schools that match up with their, not only their worldview, but with their kids and how they need to be able to learn in the environment that they would want. So with that in mind, I will get started and give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on out there. First and foremost, the numbers are truly indefensible. When you look across the nation, what's happening out there, you've got 22% of the kids who fail to graduate from high school each year. NPR even this week reported that those numbers are actually inflated. They're goosing the graduation rate, and that's from NPR. Worse though is the Department of Education reports that of those who do graduate, again, so of the kids who do graduate, 19% of them are considered functionally illiterate, that the system simply moves them through. So this is an important thing if you're thinking about what does this mean for the future of our country, what does it mean for our state, what does it mean for civic life or the well-being of these kids. If you have, 20% who fail to graduate and then another 19% who are essentially functionally illiterate, you're looking at 40% of a senior, 18-year-olds who are poorly prepared to be able to engage in the economy, in life, in civic society, all of that. So Minnesota, we like to pride ourselves on the fact that we are generally better than the rest of the country. In many ways this is true, but the reality is that here, again, 20% of our high school seniors fail to graduate each year. We're actually average right on that. Worse though is not just the graduation rate, it's what's actually happening and how well are the kids prepared. Here we find that for multiple years in a row now, less than 60% of all Minnesota students are reading at grade level. So again, that's all Minnesota students, about 860 some odd thousand kids out there. And you have less than 60% of them who are reading at grade level. When it comes to math, only 61% are able to perform math at grade level, and then science, 53%. Now, you could say, okay, well, they're coming in maybe from, poverty, broken homes, any number of these things. How does it look if we're able to take someone who's maybe behind in the elementary years? Are they able to get ahead by the time high school comes around? Unfortunately, the reality we're seeing is that that's likely not the case. For Minnesota high school students, you will find that 10th grade is when they give the reading test, and only 60% of 10th graders last year were reading at a 10th grade reading level. When it came to math, you can see they gave that test for 11th graders, and only 50% were able to do math at 11th grade level. What does this mean? What we're hearing even from, setting aside your Fortune 500 companies, we're even hearing from construction, business owners in construction, that they're having a hard time finding young workers who are actually qualified. Simply being, they're saying, look, we're having a time where kids are coming in, they can't even read a tape measure. They can't do fractional addition. So what, an inch and a half plus 2 3/4 inches, what is that? I don't know. Or they can't read the blueprint that well to be able to do the job without someone working directly with them. That's the reality, and you have to ask yourself, okay, if we're spending and investing money into this, what does it look like for the future of those kids? And again, our economy, our society. And on that topic of spending, we are spending a lot of money. You will find, we did an assessment for the entire Twin Cities Metro, and you'll find that there's not a district in the Metro that's not spending less than $12,000 per student. Many of them you can see here are spending $14,000 to $15,000. Over in Minneapolis, you get up to $21,000 spent per student. That's a lot of money. We're talking private tuition amounts that are being spent in our public schools, and unfortunately we are not getting anywhere near private school results. When you consider this, what does it actually mean if you just think, okay, if the average around the state is roughly about $13,000 spent per student, Minneapolis spending $21,000 per student, just multiply that for a class of 25 kids. You're looking at basically $525,000 on average spent for a class of 25 kids in Minneapolis. We know the average teacher pay is about $67,000. That leaves $458,000. If you throw in benefits, we know that both in St. Paul and Minneapolis, average teacher pay plus benefits is about $97,000, $98,000. So subtract $100,000 there, and you still have $425,000 left on the table to ask, where does that money go? Where is it being invested? If the teacher is the most important person and the most important part of education, why is that such a small percentage of the overall spending? It's an important question to ask. But it's not just looking at saying, okay, are we spending the money? Again, going back to those results, we're seeing that students simply are not ready. So MnSCU released a study in 2011, and it tracked kids who graduated from a Minnesota high school going into the MnSCU system. So did they go to the University of Minnesota? Did they go to Mankato State? Where did they go? And how well did they do? Did they need remedial education, or were they ready for college? What you find is that, for instance, even at Edina, you had 23% of the kids who graduated from Edina and went into the MnSCU system who needed to take at least one remedial class. Southwest High School, which would be Minneapolis's best high school presumably, 41% of those kids needed remedial education in college, in the MnSCU system. And again, Rosemount, 39%, Chaska, 32%, Eden Prairie, 29%, and so on. The reality is that kids simply are not being prepared in our public education system as we know it. Here is Kim Dallas. She's an 11th grade English teacher at Rosemount High School, which is a part of the Apple Valley, Eagan, Rosemount School District. It's one of the better school districts in the state. And she wrote to the Star Tribune on December 4, urging parents to read to their children and to increase and warning all of us, I think, about the illiteracy that's taking place in our high schools. So if you're saying those numbers that you previously saw couldn't possibly be true, here's a teacher reporting on it. She wrote, "I teach high school English, and I am begging you to please read to your children. Why? Because your children can't read. Recently, I gave a unit test where students could use all their notes and their short story on the test. Not my standard practice. The results? Abysmal. I didn't think the test was too difficult until I started doing some investigating and made a shocking discovery. They couldn't even read the test." That's in Rosemount. We're not talking about, the urban core, tougher challenges. We're talking about a fairly well-off suburb of the Twin Cities. This is distressing. But it's not just reading and writing. If we look at education, we ask the question, what is education? It is actually much more than the 3 R's. The 3 R's are actually just the building blocks. Education is the passing on of our culture, traditions, worldview, all of these things go into education. You may be able to say, okay, well, we're teaching the kids to read. Okay, well, what are they reading to be able to learn to read? All of that is going into their brains. So I can give them material and teach them to read off of books that tell them their parents are terrible, shouldn't obey them, that they're worthless, that, they're better than that. That's going to change the behavior. The child may still be able to read, but their relationship with their parents is going to be fundamentally changed. And of course the opposite is true as well. If we have kids reading books about good character, working hard, personal responsibility, things like that, that's going to change how they look at things. There is no value-neutral education, and that's something important to consider. There's some, for any parent out there, we can look at it and say, what values are being put forward? What values are being transmitted to the children? And again, this is why we look at things from the lens of saying we need greater school choice, so that if we all recognize that education is not value-neutral, parents then need to have that first right and primary duty and responsibility to choose what values are going to be passed on to their children, particularly if we're going to be maintaining a free society and living in it. So as far as what's actually being passed on, from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is sort of the gold standard for being able to tell us what's going on around the country and in certain states, we find that only 22% of all students are proficient in civics. Only 18% of all students are proficient in U.S. history, and like we saw here in Minnesota, the numbers get worse the longer the kids are in the system. So that when it comes to high school seniors, only 12% are proficient in U.S. history. This, of course, means a lot to folks who might be wanting to engage others about the Constitution, particularly young people. You want to talk about the Constitution or our government, what's happening. If we don't know our history and we don't know our civics, you actually have to start much farther back. You actually have to engage in building up those basics. This is the role of a senator. This is the role of the executive branch. This is what they do. These are the duties of the Congress versus these are the duties of the executive branch. If those understandings aren't even there, it's very difficult to be able to make the cases that many of you I know are often making. But we can also see the education philosophy and the content getting in and being very influential, and would be a surprise. Social justice fair for teachers, we were first alerted by this when we received an email from a teacher inside the Minneapolis Public Schools who forwarded the email to us. And it was an email from the president of the Minneapolis Federation for Teachers, the union representing, teachers union representing Minneapolis, urging all teachers as well as administrators to attend the social justice fair. And they would, of course, get continuing education credits for this. You can see goal 2 is to identify and work to eliminate the ways schools perpetuate injustice, including but not limited to racism, heteropatriarchy, ageism, ableism, and capitalism. These are some of the philosophies that are underlying a lot of how teachers and others in the education system as we know it today are approaching education. They have a philosophy. It's going to determine what curriculum looks like, what they talk to the kids about, things of that nature. Now, there are, of course, many parents out there who may say, I want this for my children. Fine, we're in a free society. But what about the parents who don't? What about the taxpayers who may be saying, you know what, I don't necessarily agree with this, yet this sort of material is now being taught to children, all children. And that's something to be considering. How do we actually navigate this? And again, for us, we look at it as a school choice issue, that parents, again, if we're going to publicly fund education and say, okay, taxpayer dollars should go to this, it's for the common good, we still need to respect the rights of the parents to be able to say, I would actually prefer my children to be able to have a different worldview or something else looking when it comes to the education of my children. For those who are interested, we have some examples of the entire syllabi for the social justice fair in the back that you'll be able to grab. How does it play out? Here's an example of Edina's pre-AP English syllabus. So at Edina, it will say that an English curriculum grounded in social justice rests on a belief based in equity, that each person should have access to resources regardless of race, gender, ability, age, socioeconomic status, or sexual orientation. Strikingly similar to taking from those whose ability and giving those in need, if you recall that one a little bit. Additionally, a social justice framework is grounded in the belief that children are the foundation of our future and that schools therefore can and should play a significant role in shaping an equitable landscape of that future. And right there, again, Edina quite transparently in an English curriculum saying that we are using the schools to change the worldview of kids and it's going to match up to this worldview. How does that play out in the classroom? We did a comparison between Trinity School, which is a classical education private school in Egan, versus Edina High School's 10th grade English. And you can see difference in length, but also the categories that Edina tees up their English literature with. So you see over on the left side, you have a very healthy, well-rounded education. You have Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Dickens, Burke, Austen, Marx and Engels, Dostoevsky, Orwell. A lot of these different T.S. Eliot, they're in contrast with each other. This would actually give you a wide variety of perspectives. They're not being teed up as one is better or worse than the other. On the other hand, you look at Edina, and you have literary analysis, immigration, colonization, social constructions of race and gender, and humanity in the face of danger are the categories for the English literature. This already shapes, of course, how the kids are even going to begin to engage with the materials. They've now been taught this is the paradigm through which I should view the world. I need to view the things through the lens of colonization or social constructions of race and gender. Interestingly, of course, we could talk a lot about the different books that are there. The one that's interesting to me, of course, is Humanity in the Face of Danger. You've got Kurt Vonnegut. If there are any Vonnegut fans, he's a good writer, all of that. But it's just interesting. I mean, Slaughterhouse-Five, the main protagonist is, of course, abducted by aliens and forced to procreate in front of the aliens in an alien zoo. I mean, if you're going to be picking something about humanity in the face of danger, there are a lot of good books out there that would be a little bit more realistic about what kids might be confronting and the challenges that are out there. But again, that's the way they've chosen to tee it up. Over in Woodbury, lest you think I'm just picking on Edina, you see the AP Literature syllabus there. It says that at Woodbury High School, the course is primarily structured chronologically. Social, economic, cultural, and political frameworks of the readings are sometimes explored explicitly through 8 critical lenses: feminist, deconstruction, new criticism, new historical biographical, reader response, post-colonial, psychological, and Marxist theory. It's right there on their websites.
Where's the Constitution?
What is that? Only 12% of us know. I was in the wrong side of the 12%. But it's out in the open. It's obvious. And again, are there parents who may want this for their children? Sure. Are there other parents, as well as taxpayers, who don't want this, who should have the choice and the freedom to be able to find something else for their kids? Particularly, again, looking at it from a taxpayer to say, I'm going to be funding this. If you're in opposition to that, that's something troubling, and it needs to be part of the conversation taking place in our state as well as our country, and it's why we're doing a lot of what we're doing. The results, of course, we look at things and see poll from July of last year, 42% of millennials say they're socialist, only 16% know what it is. And I think that pretty much sums up when you have a low understanding of civics and history, but that you've been taught to view the world through a certain paradigm, these are going to be your results. Now, of course, there's been a recent kerfuffle in St. Paul. I don't know how many of you are aware of the Pacific Education Group and some of the things going on there. I'm sure a few of you have heard about it. I'll talk a little bit about that. And this really just shows kind of the extremes that are taking place in our education system now. So the Pacific Education Group believes that it is critical for educators to address racial issues in order to uncover personal and institutional biases that prevent all students, and especially students of color, from reaching their fullest potential. The individual to the left is Glenn Singleton. He is the president and co-founder or founder of Pacific Education Group. It is a consulting firm based out of San Francisco. It goes around to a lot of different public schools, both here in Minnesota and around the country, and goes in and does teacher training and helps them to change how they do a lot of things, whether it be curriculum, the approaches, discipline in the classroom, things of this nature, all based on the idea that there is systemic racism, that there is white privilege, and that is what is oftentimes, unfortunately, holding down students of color. And so they believe that, the primary lens through which you should view any problems in the schools or in society is through the lens of race, that is where things start. They will host what they call a courageous conversation, And part of the courageous conversation that you can find all over the place, that they will sit teachers down, administrators, students, others on occasion. So you will start with 4 agreements. The first, of course, is to stay engaged, to speak your truth, to experience discomfort. And that is an important one. If you watch videos and read the material, it's important for you to be able to experience discomfort when it's pointed out to you that there's systemic racism, that there's white privilege, that your white privilege, you're not even aware of your white privilege and how it's holding everyone else down. And then, of course, expect and accept non-closure. So the 6 conditions through which they start to work is to focus on personal, local, and immediate issues, to isolate race, to normalize social construction, again, social construction coming into it, multiple perspectives. Number 4, monitor agreements, conditions, and so on. Number 5, to use a working definition for race. And then number 6, to examine the presence and role of whiteness. And so it's fascinating. I was on the radio last week discussing this, and a woman called in and said, you know, my husband is in St. Paul Public Schools. He's been forced to go to these. He's outraged by it. And they sat him down and said, and he's white, and they said, you know, he said, I'm not a racist. And he said, no, you are, you're a racist, and it's your whiteness, and you simply don't understand. He said, I'm married to a Hispanic woman, and we have a mixed race child. How am I racist? You don't understand. You still racist. And and this was the wife calling in, outraged by everything that's taking place. We're finding more and more teachers that we're hearing from, others are hearing from, who are saying, you know, we're being forced to come into these sessions and teacher training sessions. And when we ask these questions, such as, what do I do if a child of color acts out? I need to be able to discipline them, to be able to say, no, you can't do that. And what they're often told by these trainers is that, no, they're acting out not because they're being naughty or just out of line, but they're acting out because they sense your white oppression, your privilege is being forced upon them. And so therefore it's your problem, not the problem of the child. And so this is leading to enormous problems out there. I'll get into some of it. This was a slide from one of the St. Paul teacher training sessions that was inspired by Pacific Education Group. And again, it's a way of experiencing discomfort. So the slide, for those of you in the back who can't read it, has a picture of what would appear to be some Ku Klux Klansmen, and it asks, when do you wear the hood? So again, it's very much in line with that whole, you know, the old running question, you know, when did you stop beating your wife? Okay, I never did that. No, when did you stop? I mean, the presumption of guilt that you're not even aware of is being hammered on somebody. But imagine the injustice of being a teacher. Your livelihood is dependent upon you having a job. You're going into this, your superiors have pulled you into a meeting, and then you're asked, when do you wear the hood? And you're told it's your white privilege that's wrecking everything. That you are the problem, and you're just trying to do your job. I mean, this is actually a terrible injustice that's taking place, but it happens. The results, actually, even the city pages, I mean, a very left-leaning, far left, some would argue, newspaper here in town reported on all of this. They had recognized it as chaos as well, as endangering teachers, endangering students. What's essentially happening is that what you're seeing in St. Paul is that to implement equity, one of the areas that they've identified as a problem would be behavior, discipline, and the suspension rates for kids getting in trouble. So therefore, to be able to solve the problem of disparities in suspension rates between, for instance, African American children and white children, they're doing away with the ability of teachers or others to be able to suspend or to discipline the African American students. Now, this all gets very sensitive. You know, any number of parents that are out there that are looking at the situation are saying, well, you know, there is something wrong. I mean, when you're looking at it as far as some perspectives are saying there's, you know, race issues, things of this nature, and to a degree I think that there is some truth that there's always going to be these kinds of problems. You're never going to, unfortunately, do away with racism. It's very something that, sadly, that's been a part of human history, and it is an ugly part of it. But I think that America as a whole, we're trying to get over it. But when you're seeing what's happening is chaos is breaking out. This is just one parent talking about what's happening. My second grader's class is the most dysfunctional classroom I have ever witnessed with my own 2 eyes, she says. I have never even heard of classrooms like Miss Wood's. She has maybe 6 extreme behavior students in one class. I've seen them punch her. I've seen them walk around the halls. I've seen her try to read to the class, and it took her an hour and a half to read 2 pages. It's too much. And there's story after story after story of this, where kids are just, because they've done away with discipline, because they've done away with the ability of teachers to be able to have control over their class, in the name of equality, we have chaos. It's an injustice not only to the children, but to the teachers and those in that situation. And what are you going to do in that situation? So, $3 million is what St. Paul Public Schools spent over the course of 5 years for Pacific Education Group. They also did work with all of these school districts. For those who can't read it in the back, Anoka, Hennepin, Bloomington, Rosemount, Apple Valley, Eagan, Duluth, Eden Prairie, Edina, Farmington, Hopkins, Inver Grove, Lakeville, Minneapolis, North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, Osseo, Richfield, Robbinsdale, Rochester, Roseville, St. Paul, of course, South Washington, which is Woodbury, Spring Lake, St. Cloud, St. Louis Park, and Wayzata. We've also done work with some of the associations for teachers as well as principals in the area. And so again, you're seeing this working through the system, and unfortunately, it is not working at all. When we looked at the reading achievement gap for St. Paul Public Schools, you can see for those in the back, it's been, unfortunately, to give you a background on this situation, that the achievement gap in Minneapolis as well as St. Paul is one of the worst in the country. We do have a very serious problem, particularly for our kids of color. It's an injustice. If you look right now, you only have 25% of African American students who are reading at grade level. In Minneapolis, it's only 23%. And so we ask, if they're to better their lives, if they're to do well, if they're to embrace freedom, how do we change that number? Pacific Education Group is saying that it's racism. That is the root cause of all of this. Is there racism? Sure. But is it the root cause? I doubt it. And they've proposed, of course, that by solving that, over the course of their 5 years of help and consulting, that things would improve. The reality, though, is that over the last 5 years, in particular the last 2 years, things have actually gotten much worse in St. Paul Public Schools. And that's your ultimate judge. If their solutions were the key to making things better, why are things getting so much worse? Why is it that 72% of white students are reading at grade level now, and only 25% of African American students are reading at grade level? That's a 47-point difference, whereas 3 years ago it was a 38-point difference in that gap. When we actually look at the numbers, what we see, and this is a reality going back to what is the purpose of education, the ethos, things like that, we have to look not just racism or poverty, but you can also look at family breakdown. In St. Paul, unfortunately for the African American community, you have out-of-wedlock birth rates that are oftentimes in the 80 and even in some years 90th percentile. So consider that. If you're coming out of an unstable family background and things are breaking down in that sense, it's going to be tough to be able to focus on your work. But there are many charter schools as well as private schools that are doing good work with kids that are coming out of truly tough backgrounds. And that's what we want to be able to see. The differentiator there is oftentimes discipline as well as ethos. It's giving the kids a reason to overcome the tough background that they had. And I speak of that coming out of, I was raised by a single mother, she cleaned houses, lived in mobile homes for a while, all of that. So I know that tough background, I know the tough background for single moms, but it does require giving the kids a reason to be able to rise above and simply telling them that, everyone else is holding you down, even if people are holding you down. Just telling them, you're just being held down and that's just how it is, isn't enough. We've got to be able to give the kids something else to fight for, to be able to overcome that tough background, and to be able to take part in the American dream, as I think we all would want to be able to see all kids be able to do it. And again, that's why we believe we need school choice. And what does that mean? Choice for parents and students, flexibility for educators, and of course competition in education. How would it work? The dollars would actually follow the students. So for the parents, let's say African American parents who are in St. Paul Public Schools, they can look at those numbers and say, you know, or the chaos in the classroom, I want out. I want to go somewhere else. And the parent that I quoted there, as well as many other parents, are all saying, we're making plans to pull our kids out. We want our kids to be in a safe environment and an academically rigorous environment. And that's where it comes to educators competing with different approaches. Again, going back to this idea of value neutral or sort of a monolithic approach that you find in the public schools today, we can have a diversity of approaches, and they actually work. It's a shame that St. Paul and in Minneapolis and these other districts called in a consulting firm from San Francisco, when we have very good examples, both charters and private schools here locally, that are doing amazing work with kids from very tough backgrounds. They're actually getting the kids to meet or beat state averages when it comes to reading and math. So again, there are ways to be able to do this, but it takes a diversity of approaches and the freedom to be able to have those approaches, and for the freedom for parents to be able to choose the best schools for their children. Even in this current situation, asking polling, this was done by the Milton Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, earlier part of this year. You find that when it comes to asking, are you in favor of school vouchers and school choice, without any background information, 40% of Minnesotans favor it, as opposed to 25% in opposition. When you provide a much longer definition, as far as what does school choice mean and what do vouchers mean, support jumps to 64% in Minnesota for school choice. People believe in this, it's part of it. People believe, especially Americans, that parents should have the freedom to be able to choose. The things holding it back, though, is that right now, 52% of Minnesotans think that things are going in the right direction in the public school system. The numbers I shared with you, when less than 60% of all students in Minnesota are reading at grade level, that's not the right direction. But the public hasn't been alerted to what's happening, which is why we're doing this and why I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here and share some of these numbers. Additionally, most Minnesotans, and this is true for most Americans, have no idea what's actually being spent on education. You find that 20% of Minnesotans believe that schools spend $4,000 or less per student, and again, in the Twin Cities, there's not a school district that spends less than $12,000. Many are spending $14,000, $15,000, Minneapolis, $21,000. 24% of Minnesotans believe that schools spend between $4,000 and $8,000 per student. The good news, though, is that a growing portion of Minnesotans are quickly becoming aware that the schools do spend that, with 20%. And that's double the percentage who are aware of spending compared to any of the other states that this same question was run in. So, from our perspective, again, we don't have time to waste. These numbers and this course, as you saw from the achievement gap, has been going on for a very long time. This didn't happen just overnight. It has been declining and flatlining for a long time, and we believe the education system must be changed now. And again, a little quote from Aristotle, the fate of empires depends upon the education of the youth, and that is firmly something that is very true. How the kids are educated, how they are formed is going to determine how they're going to live their lives, engage in the economy, raise families, and engage, of course, civically. With that, open it up for questions if we have time. I don't know, Jake, do we have time for a couple questions? Or?
Yes, we do.
All right. Question in the back.
Yes.
Wait until we get there. I'm coming. I'm coming.
Hold on, no question.
I got this one, Jack.
I know, I'm urging to move a little faster.
Thank you. I actually have two parts on this. When you were saying about the difference, the disparity between in the reading between white students and black students, does the black student there include all the immigrants and everything, or primarily the black students who are from here? I don't see a breakdown on that. Secondly, when the money goes ahead and follows the student, we currently have that in Minnesota, at least with children with disabilities. And one of the main problems that I found with my stepson is that I was on lists to get him into another school for several years, number 7, number 7, number 2, it never made it. And the reason we never made it is because in this state, all immigrants, whether legal or illegal or whatever, get first priority, especially if they move into that school district. So even if you want to move to another school, money following the school, you don't get in.
Right, to address the first one, right now the breakout, this would just be all students considered white or African American based on race. We can parse into the data to be able to see English language learners and others and see how that's performing, but I don't have the numbers right in front of me. So I can tell you that there is a very large gap between native-born African American versus non-native born in the immigrants. So you see a very big, when it comes to out-of-wedlock birth rates. So for immigrants, it's, if I recall correctly, around 40% out-of-wedlock birth rate versus 80 to 90 for native born. So you do have a large disparity. And that would again reflect something not of race, but rather of culture and family breakdown thing. Well, naturally, if you're talking about out-of-wedlock, but it addresses other issues. As for the question about money following the kids, yes, if you were to move districts, right now you're looking at, if you were just to break out the average, the total amount, gross expenditures by just the state, not including property taxes, and then divide by the total number of students in the public schools, you find that the state spends around $10,000 per student. Those dollars, and then it gets broken out depending on categories and things like that, so it's not just, unfortunately, a clean $10,000 that goes with each kid. But if you were to move school districts, yes, the money from the state will change and go to that. Property taxes, of course, dollars would remain the same. When we talk about education and school choice, we're actually pushing for a voucher or, in an ideal case, education savings accounts. And that is something we don't have. Last week, I believe, or the week before, newborn brain, sorry. But Nevada actually just passed statewide universal education savings accounts. Now, Nevada as a state spends a lot less per student than Minnesota does. We're one of the high spenders in the country, but their education savings account would work similar to a health savings account if you have one of those, or medical savings account. And roughly about every kid would have the opportunity to get $5,000, and maybe more, maybe a little less, depending on needs and how much they make. And that would go into a card, and they'd be able to go to it. So ours isn't a clean money following the kid. Now, if you were to go to a charter school, you'll find many of the charter...
That's the thing I'm saying.
Exactly. And part of the problem there is that, for instance, charter schools have been limited as far as their abilities because they can't even own their own buildings. So you're able to, those who would want to maintain the current system, understand the ways to be able to squeeze the market and to be able to limit the options that are out there. If you want to be able to start a charter school or something like that, but you can't find a building to be able to have your school in, that's problematic. And so again, it actually squeezes the number of choices that are out there. Hopefully that answers.
Over here.
To get a sense of the importance of education, do we know how much of education money is spent out of the state budget?
Yeah, roughly percentage-wise, I think it'll go up to about 42% of the state budget of the general fund is being spent on education. That's your big bucket.
And we keep hearing all the time that it's so important that it's for the kids, it's for the kids. And once again, we just gave another boatload of money to education, and we're not getting the bang for the buck.
Correct.
So if it's so important, should we be demanding that we get a little bit more bang for our buck and we get something in return instead of just throwing money at us?
Right. The argument is the more money will solve the problem. And that works if you believe that, for instance, if you think that we're only spending $4,000 or less per student, you're thinking, okay, we're essentially our public education system, we're spending, Geo Metro or Ford Focus prices on it. But in reality, we're spending Ferrari prices on education and not getting Ferrari results. And so again, when we look at it, we say, okay, what is just? If we, the taxpayers, have all decided that it's in the common good, it's part of the Minnesota Constitution to provide for education, then what is the better way to be able to do that? And that's by changing the funding mechanism so that rather than that dollars going into what is essentially a monopolistic system, that you would then have parents having the freedom to be able to find the best schools for them, to be able to open that market up so that you can actually get into schools, find other schools, but also for educators to be able to approach education with different education philosophies, different curriculum, things of that nature. So.
We're going to only take one more question. Because,
one more question.
Yeah,
I'll let you guys pick. So
Jake's going to pick, but the question that he was kind of asking is, what percentage of the money that we pay in taxes actually goes to the students, not only the other peripheries? Do you have data on that?
Yeah, well, that's where you get into what does it look like for a class of 25 kids. When you start to get into the budgets, it's pretty tough to be able to figure out, okay, where is each dollar going? And I mean, we're talking, for instance, Minneapolis spends, almost $800 million annually on education. That's one school district, $800 million. It's a twin stadium and a third each year. But again, you look at it, $525,000 for a class of 25 kids. Teacher, all in, is only getting about $100,000 of that with benefits. So there's $425 grand on the table. That's arguably outside of the classroom. A portion of that would go to classroom maintenance and curriculum. But where the rest goes, that's the question.
Devin, the last question is here with Kate. I think her question is related to statistics of students that identify as Black students, right? Okay, that's wrong.
First, I just want to say one thing. I went to the Liberty Classical Academy.
Yes.
And heard Dr. Latier.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last winter, and that place, anybody that hasn't been, it is just an incredible experience just to see what they're doing there at Liberty Classical Academy, White Bear Lake. I'm sorry. These always intimidate me. My question is, I've asked this question before from others, and I don't really know what you do to dismantle. I'm coming at it from a different angle of how to dismantle what you were talking about when I came in about how the teachers are told you're a biased person and you're doing this all wrong. And they're also, those same teachers are being told that at the universities they're graduating from. That's always been my thing, is why or how can we go to, any of us that went to college, what it's like. How do we get to the source where they're cranking out these people that are also becoming administrators, not just teachers, but they're working up the chain for a lot of money?
Well, this gets into the issue of school choice as well as teacher licensure, things of that nature. When you have requirements that essentially force people to go into the colleges of education to be able to teach, you're going to be able to mold them and shape them in a certain way. What you see other schools, for instance, Trinity and Egan, many of their teachers are not education majors. So you may have a history major, an English major, being able to do the teaching. I look at a lot of people here who probably have great skills, math, science, literature, English, any number of things. The question is, what requirements should we have out there to be able to teach? And so again, that diversity of approaches that are out there. Do you want a free-for-all and be able to say anybody can be able to do that? No. But I can also tell you that looking at the SAT, ACT scores, when you look at the group who's going into the colleges of education, they're in the lower quintile. The top folks are going either into the sciences or into religion and philosophy and history. Those are where the top scores go. So again, if you look at school choice, it's saying this gives people the opportunity, if you want to be able to send your child to a private school that then is bringing in, qualified people, that they've made sure that they're good, the results are there, but it's a history guy or it's a retired engineer from 3M, that gives you the opportunity to have those diversity of approaches. So, and with that, I think...
we can sign up over here to get more information.
Yeah, if you'd like to go over to, we have a table over there. Barbara will be happy to sign you up. We also have good material over there. There's actually two, just for those who like a little bit of history. There's a Tiffany's, the Tiffany company took out an ad in the 1970s talking about the importance of education, but the changes in it and why we need to get back to it. So my father clipped it out and left it for me, but we have copies of it back there. Totally worth the read. It's good stuff. So,
give him a round of
applause.
applause.